Dr. Rashawn Ray, it is always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being with us again, sir.
Thank you as always for having me on.
Absolutely. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to all of the, I think it was what, 5 hours of oral arguments that took place yesterday. But what we do know is that from all signs, it does seem that the policy known as affirmative action, if this court's Federalist Society Christo-fascist majority has anything to do with it, is probably on its way out. What say you about what that would mean for the state of Black people to navigate this space and to continue to excel in academic spaces? I think I have a feeling about where you might go with this. What options does this leave for us? How much has affirmative action really impacted our quality of life? Let's talk about this because we know that once they get rid of it in education, it will soon fall in other spaces as well. That was a lot, I think a 14-part question right there. So feel free to pick any of them that you wish and let us know what you think about that.
Yeah, well, as always, thanks for having me on. I mean, I think first it's going to have huge implications for Black students and Latino students. How do we know that?
Mm,
Because we have one of the best examples from the state of California, which was
yeah.
pretty much the first state to implement it and one of the first large states to repeal it. And we have to remember who was playing a role in that process, and that was Clarence Thomas, who
Ooh.
essentially played a huge role in getting rid of what's called Proposition 209, which essentially established helped to establish affirmative action in California and the rest of the country. And of course, we know that
Mm,
affirmative action started, at least in the Supreme Court, with the Bakke case in 1978, who was a white medical student who was admitted in the University of California system, said he didn't get in because he was Black. The Supreme Court was like, well, a whole bunch of Black people not getting in because they Black, right? So let's be clear about that. But we know the original usage of the term came in the early 1960s from President Kennedy when he said, I'm going to take affirmative action to ensure
mm.
that Black federal contractors can obtain rights to get the same federal grants as white people who are applying for these grants. Notice what I said, that they will be
Mm.
able to apply to gain access to get, not just get if you don't qualify for it. And we got to be clear about that. And Black people do this all the time. We got to stop doing this, y'all. Even Black people will say, oh, well, affirmative action, this person didn't qualify. That's not what affirmative action does. If we use a
Mm.
model of walking up to a home, what traditionally happens to Black people, and still happens, I'll get to quickly in a second, is that Black people haven't even been able to knock on the doors, right? Let's be clear. We
Mm.
haven't even been able to knock on the doors. What affirmative action does is cracks it open. And then if a person has the qualifications, gives them the ability to compete to walk in, right? So that's what affirmative action does. It does not allow people who are not qualified to do something. What affirmative action is done in higher education, of course, I know this very well. I'm a professor. I have a PhD. I've been in these spaces. I have multiple degrees. I went through this process in terms of what this looks like inside and out from various perspectives. What race
Dr.
is,
Ray, we call those receipts in the common parlance. Those
I,
are the receipts.
I
Go ahead,
got I
sir.
got a whole lot of receipts. I got multiple receipts, and I also chair and sit on selection committees for students getting into school and obtaining fellowships
Mm.
and jobs. So I know this space very well. Race is used as one of the factors by which to make decisions. What the
Yeah.
Supreme Court is currently ruling on is whether race can be considered at all. And I want people to think
Mm.
about this. When affirmative action was put into place about race in the early 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act happened in 1964, it wasn't only about race, because we know that equality for other groups are oftentimes happen on the back of Black people. It became not only about race,
That's
it
right.
became about gender, ability, and religion, and now has been expanded even more so. And affirmative action has been shown to be more beneficial for women than, say, racial minority groups. And that's important as well, because that parity for women is important, but the parity for Black people and Latinos and indigenous people is important as well. So I
And
think when we look
specifically
at
white
this,
women who have been the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action. I know that shocks a lot of people, but this is going to be a real blow for the white women advancement because white women are the one who have gotten far and away most of the benefits out of the affirmative action program. Is that accurate, Dr.
yeah,
Ray?
that's accurate. I mean, look, affirmative action has been beneficial primarily to women and white women specifically, as you mentioned. But this is what I think the Supreme Court is going to do. And they hinted at this yesterday. First off, as you're saying, I think affirmative action as we think we know it, because part of what I'm getting at is when affirmative action got rolled back in the 90s in California, it also got rolled back in other places. It has not operated the way we thought that it was supposed to since the mid 90s. This is the reason why we went in reverse when it came to Black people going to top universities and also getting into professional occupation. So let's be clear about that. It's a lot. Black people are getting more bachelor's degrees than we have in recent time, roughly 25% of us. But where are we getting it from? Not only are we more likely to take out student loans because we don't get those minority scholarships that these institutions don't hand out anymore. That was about affirmative action. But then we are also more likely to go to for-profit institutions where they just taking our money where we taking out loans. So we got to be clear about the setup. Wow. But my point is affirmative action hasn't been operating as it used to. But what the Supreme Court said is that they're potentially not going to remove the other ways that affirmative action operates when it comes to, say, gender, but they are going to shift to a socioeconomic status model, meaning more about income and where people are from. And they're going to start thinking about things such as preferences based on income and also focusing on the top 10% programs. This is what Texas did, where they say, look, in order to control for the fact that, you know, that Lurie and Ray went to different types of high schools, we're going to say if both of them fall within the top 10% of their class, then they will be able to get priority for applying for schools within the state. Right. And that's extremely important to know, because this means that you succeeded where you were. You were in the top 10% of your class. And then the final one, they, of course, want to eliminate, they being the Supreme Court, want to eliminate preferences for children of alumni and major donors. Why is that important? Because we just saw with the college admission scandal that primarily wealthy white families were getting their children into college. And I can tell people that happens a whole lot more than people thinking that a Black kid that didn't deserve the college is there and shouldn't have been there. Believe me, if that Black kid is there, he or she deserved to be there. I can tell you that.
I know that's right. I know that's right. And then we have not just the college admission scandals and the repeated reminders that it is primarily white women who are getting the greatest advantage of these spaces. But we also have the fact that the vast majority of Black students who are getting these degrees, my understanding is that they are coming from an HBCU higher education experience. Is that accurate, Dr. Ray?
You're saying when they go on to graduate school?
Right, that the greatest number of students who are Black students who are getting these advanced degrees, they're not actually getting them from some of these white institutions. They're actually getting them from HBCUs. Is that accurate as far as you know?
Most definitely. I mean, HBCUs have always been and continue to be the biggest producer of Black people with advanced degrees. When we start talking about going to medical school, dentistry, optometry, going on to get masters and PhDs at top institutions, that pipeline that W.B. Du Bois set when he went from Fisk to Atlanta University, which, you know, became Morehouse and Clark, and then went up to Harvard, and they said, oh, I bet you feel honored to be here. He said, no, believe me, the honor is all Harvard's, right? So that, and of course, Du Bois was the first Black person to get a PhD from Harvard. He happened to get that in sociology. He happens to be an alpha. Just shout out to both of them on my side. But yes, I mean, you're exactly right. HBCUs continue to produce this, and this is why this is important. 2 points. And this is important for people whose children are applying for college. All right. Now, I'm just going to say the facts, and then we talk about what we potentially do about it. The first is that if you go to an HBCU, you are more likely to be given a subprime loan. What that means in education is you are less likely to be given access to subsidized loans. This is the reason why what Joe Biden is doing is so important. It's really about unsubsidized and unsubsidized loans. To tell people specifically what that means. If you get a subsidized loan, that means the interest on your loans will not take effect until you finish school. Let's play this out.
That's right.
Say you go to med school, say you go get a PhD. I did 4 years getting my bachelor's. It took me 7 years to get my PhD. That included 2 getting my master's. All right. So we're talking about 11 years. If I took out a loan my freshman year of high school, which I didn't, I went through with all scholarships and grants and fellowships. We talk about that another time. But if I did that my freshman year, like a lot of us do, if you have a subsidized loan, the interest won't accrue until you finish your PhD or finish your JD.
Wow.
If you have an
that is a huge thing.
It's a huge thing. If you have an unsubsidized loan, your interest starts immediately. Okay, that you're not going to be paying back. The second big thing that happens is sociological research documents. Ted Thornhill, who was a sociologist in Florida, is part of the reason for the backlash in Florida that they're doing around critical race theory. He's one of the scholars that DeSantis has been going after directly. But what Ted Thornhill found in his research is that if Black applicants put on their resume and in their essay that they support Black Lives Matter, that they have engaged in organizations and events that support being anti-racist against Black people, that they are less likely to get admitted to college. Now, look,
Wow.
I'm not telling you to tell your kid, if you got a little activist kid, you grew up in the Obama era, you told them race was over, and they like, mama, you didn't tell me about Trump, you didn't tell me about Charlottesville, you didn't tell me about all this, right? I'm doing this work. What you instead want to do is look for institutions that's not going to hold that against your child. But this is why affirmative action policies are important. See, we get wrapped up in the wrong thing. We get to talking about kids' GPAs and their test scores. Believe me, if these Black kids get into these colleges, I can tell you, I sit on these admissions boards. They deserve to be there. The question is, what prevents them from being there? That's called racism. And that's why affirmative action is in place, to prevent that from happening on my side of the table.
So, Dr. Ray, if we were to move to a more economic-based model, I've heard some people say, well, Black people have plenty of poverty, overrepresented in poverty numbers. Wouldn't that be beneficial for us? Or would it at least preserve benefits for us as it pertains to affirmative action policies if economic status were to be considered while race is removed from the table? And I just want to say, race is one of like 40 other things that schools consider. It's grades. Oh, Brittany, give me the, what the thing? Throat. Love it when my team is on point. So sorry, y'all. The frogs are trying to come from my throat. But Dr. Ray, if we're talking about the fact that we've got poverty, if affirmative action is only allowed to pursue or continue along economic lines, would that still allow us to benefit in similar ways? And if not, what then are we to do if affirmative action is removed and the economic option is not a beneficial one for us?
So it would not allow Black people to, it would allow Black people to benefit, but it would not necessarily allow us to benefit in similar ways. And this is why. Two reasons. First, research documents, Raj Chetty, who is an economist at Harvard, has some of the best work on this, showing that Black people are the most upwardly and downwardly mobile of any racial group in America. What does this mean? When you get a bachelor's degree, your kids are significantly less likely to not have one. When you get a bachelor's degree, Black people, let me tell you, your pathway, your generational pathway to success and wealth is for you to ensure that your kids go to college, the next generation. We are more likely to fall out of that. So when affirmative action policies leave, if we only have a socioeconomic based model and someone is a nurse or a lawyer or what have you, and they're making 60, 100, over $100,000 a year, their family is not going to qualify for an income-based program. Instead, a better model is wealth. If we use wealth, now all of a sudden, more Black people, regardless of their education and income, qualify. That wealth component now takes into account whether or not you went to a HBCU and got hit with unsubsidized loans that you didn't know you were getting hit with, where you had to take out more loans because your parents didn't have money to send you to law school or medical school or what have you. So wealth is a better indicator. And the reason why is because on average, Black people have 10 times less wealth than the average white family. Black college graduates do little to close that gap. We are 7 times less wealthy than white college graduates. So if we take a socioeconomic based model, which from a sociological standpoint, when we say SES, socioeconomic status, we don't just mean income. We also mean occupation and education. That's a complicated model to get around. Instead, we just need wealth. Use what and whether or not they will qualify for not just Pell Grants, but any sort of financial aid based on a wealth model, and we would get to a better result, not only taking into account Black people who have done well, who don't need it, and Black people who haven't done well, but of course it will be including other groups across race that where it's quite beneficial, where they have not been able to get up in rural America or in indigenous communities where we know that still plays a role.
You know, when I was in undergrad, I had a pre-law advisor who, without knowing my grades, without knowing anything about me, I was a walk-in to her office. She had not pulled up any data about me, told me when I told her I wanted to go to law school, well, you know, Lurie, affirmative action is not going to be around very long. She was a Latina. Shout out to you, Elena Paul, Penn State, pre-law advisor. And she said, you know, affirmative action is not going to be around very long, so you should consider applying to 3rd and 4th tier schools. These are schools that are considered lesser quality. And I always said, if I got a chance to see you again, Elena, I was going to let you know, girl, I got an academic scholarship to NYU, and I got accepted in to, was it 8 out of top 10 schools? So what we ain't going to do is talk to black students preemptively as though they don't have the qualifications to access these spaces simply because they're black. Dr. Ray, I am crystal clear that this Supreme Court, we in Plessy mode right now, right? This Supreme Court is not trying to hear anything about your racial equity, your justice, your wealth models. I do believe they're going to pull affirmative action. I hope I'm wrong, but I do believe that they will. Where's the Kujichagulia plan, as you can see it? Is there a Kujichagulia, a self-determining path forward that says, you know what, we got to sue to get into their jobs, and they keep as few of us there as little as time as possible. We got to sue to get into their schools. They do everything they can to keep us out and keep it as a hostile environment. At a certain point, aren't we going to be forced to grapple with the reality that they're just not that into us? And yet we still have to thrive and figure out a way forward. What is the Kujichagulia model response to this?
I think it's probably what's happening in North Carolina A&T is probably what's happening at Jackson State. It is figuring out ways to funnel resources to our HBCUs. And I think we really have to think about that. And I say that in the context that this current generation of Black students, the ones that I was just mentioning that came up like cheering for Obama, and their parents was like, yes, my baby finally got to deal with this. And then they're like, Mama, Daddy, you lied to me. That they've already chosen. They are going to HBCUs and they are choosing universities that clearly value them as people, which is how it should be. See, I tell people, being a professor, if a student makes it to college, they're smart, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I pause slightly
Usually.
because I will say, and here goes the thing. The students that I've seen that lack it, interestingly, and even lack motivation are the ones that come with a big old bag of money that their parents have given them. Like, I'll say
or
that.
Or they're the legacies who got admitted
That's
off
exactly
of no
right.
qualifications, but because your daddy and mama went to the school. And that's 40% of the Harvard population is legacy students, no qualifications, no real actual brilliance, just they was born out of the right uterus. I mean,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that hasn't been it hasn't been that many Black people where that's happened for. And so, you know, I think is supporting HBCUs. I think in particular, these students are telling us that's where they want to go. What we need is more funding for scholarships for HBCUs. Why is that? Because unless HBCUs have decided to become state institutions, where interestingly, like at Tennessee State, white students get minority scholarships. So, dude, I went to high school with it. My class reunion, I don't remember if it was 10 or 20. I can't remember which one. And he was like, yeah, I'm a nurse. You know, I went to TSU. Yeah, on a minority scholarship. Right. So we have to remember it operates the same way. This is about proportional representation, racial composition. Right. But I think it's an investment in HBCUs. I think also what it is parents realizing, look, your kids' grades are really important. And despite what they're telling us right now, that test scores don't matter, they still do for your kids. Focus on that. Right. Focus on ensuring that their package is good. Focus that their letters of recommendation say they're going to be the next Serena Williams. And then also network, go to the universities. And again, you've heard me say this, pull the 3-4-3 model. 3 schools you run to, 4 schools that make sense, 3 schools that your kids should get into. Apply to more than 2 to 3 schools. Apply to some wish schools. The money is there for your kids to go to college. And guess what? They deserve it.
Listen, my son went to an event, the local Delta Teen Lift event, and they did a scholarship party. He came, he's like, Ma, they got scholarships for left-handed people. I was like, oh, baby, just don't you worry. Just keep them grades going. We going to find them scholarships. But we have had conversations. Listen, my dude, we love you dearly. But this B- right here, this is costing us money. This is about 4 credits worth of classes in money that we will have to add up and pony up if you don't pull this B- up to an A-, which we know you can do. So having to come to Jesus and come to the wallet and the pocketbook conversation is very, very important. And that 3-4-3 model, Dr. Ray, I think we may need to break that down a little bit more and have a more in-depth discussion about it, because people are going to have to navigate a new reality. What Elena Paul told me in the late 19s was not necessarily accurate for me, but it is certainly going to be accurate. She was just off by a couple of decades. Racist. She was just off by a couple of decades. And the reality is now here. But I believe that this Kujichagulia model, frankly, it's the only one that's going to work for us. That's my perspective. I will own that as Lurie, the independent thinker and host of this show. I'm not going to put those words on you, but there is no model like self-determination because it literally empowers us to do for ourselves what others would not do if they had to, because we see what they have done when they did have to, and they've done everything they can to no longer have that impediment. Dr. Ray, how can people continue to follow you, learn from you, and the work that you are doing at the lab and all the work that you're doing as you sit in the seat of professor who is able to help us opine on these things?
Yeah, I mean, people can follow me on social media at Sociologist Ray. I'm on all platforms. Feel free to connect with me. Lurie, I also just want to say quickly, the other thing people can do is when your kid is in high school, get them prepared for honors and AP courses. They do that. They take a test, they test out. And then if there's a community college model that they can do in conjunction with high school, they can come to college with a whole bunch of credits. I have students that come to University of Maryland with 60 credits by the time they get there. There are students who get a scholarship who finish their master's in 3 years. Do you know what that means? They are 21 with a master's degree and no debt. And you know what? You become very powerful. You express a whole bunch of agency, and people better get out your way. Black people, we can do this self-determination model with some of the skills that we're learning.
I love it because there is always a way forward when we use Coochie Chocolate. Dr. Ray, thank you for that. In fact, we might need to do a couple of episodes just on navigating this process. We'll put some thought and some planning into that. Thank you so much for being with us today and helping us to unpack the real world implications of what took place in front of the Supreme Court yesterday. We appreciate you as always, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right.